Okay, so I'm going to call us to order at 6:01. And we have Vicky as our minute taker. And we'll give you our timekeeper. Yes, great. Okay, so I think this might be our second meeting of the school year. So before we start, and since we have folks here for public comment, I want to thank you for coming. And just share with you that we are continually thinking about our public comment process and how to make it respectful of folks who come to visit with the board, and also respectful for the board and our time. And we're trying to ensure that people have an opportunity to share what's on their minds, and that if we aren't able to respond during the meeting, but there is a request for more information, that we will make note of that and someone will get back to you. So we want you to know that. We are keeping folks to a 2-minute time frame. So if you have something to share that's beyond that, we ask, and also in general, if you can get that to us, whatever you've shared with us in writing, that would be great. So anything else I missed on public comment? Okay, so thanks for being here. Elisa?
May we cede our time to the spokesperson?
I suppose so. Have we talked about that? No, we haven't really.
I'm the
talked
only one that's
about
gonna
that.
speak of all of us.
Okay. I mean, we haven't really talked about that. Let's see how it goes. Again, we just want to be respectful of your time, but also our time here. So Elisa, go ahead.
Can I, sorry, before you start talking, Elisa, we do have 10 minutes for public comment. So how about for today, since you're the only spokesperson, if it goes outside of 10 minutes?
Oh, it won't.
Okay, then we'll have
I'm pretty sure.
Great, thank you. Okay,
I'm sorry, could you, I know people know you, but I don't, could you spell your name for me?
Yes, my name is Elisa, Elissa, Cobb, COBB. And I'd love for everybody here to just speak their name, gather close and say your name out loud.
Hi, I'm Nikki Adiz.
I'm Lori Lowy. Mary Barnett. Pat Sharp. Jennifer Forrest.
Ann Wallace.
Maren Rogers.
Dave Sharp. Dave Cobb.
Helen McChesky.
thank you.
I'm here as a follow-up to when I came here, April 2023, and left you a long plea of including anti-racism education in the high school, along with acquiring a trauma specialist who has experience with racialized trauma and a few other things. And I'm back because it's the first opportunity of the new year, just as a reminder, and to take a moment to call all of you into this process that we believe is a really important thing for our community. And hopefully, if that can happen in our community, it's something that can spread across the United States. I know it's already starting to grow in other places. And so tonight, I just wanted to share with you a brief story about a very good Qigong teacher of mine that told me about a yogi that he knew, who at one time said, in regards to balancing poses, which are very difficult for people to do, balancing poses, this teacher would say, how can you ever expect to stand on 2 legs if you can't even stand on one? And so for me at that time, it was funny, but now I'm starting to take that much more seriously, and realizing that most white Americans don't have 2 legs to stand on when it comes to dealing with or learning how to deal with or figuring out what to do about anti-racism and racism in our systematic thing. And we're in that, in this committee, in this community, we're in that system of racism that we can't figure out what to do with. And so we really just keep standing on the 1 leg, but we're trying to stand on 2 to get something done, and we can't because we haven't developed a second leg ourselves individually. We haven't taken the time to learn enough to do that. So I wanted to read tonight, real briefly, a paragraph from the 1619 Project. I want to recommend this book. This itself could be the course we teach in our school. It could be a simple teacher, students reading the book, talking about it, having discussions, and going into the world much more educated than any of us ever were in our school, right? so that we could send out people into the community, young people that can do the things that we don't know how to do from our generation. This book is by Nicole Hannah-Jones, who won the Pulitzer Prize with this book. And in this book, she writes, a 2018 report by the Southern Poverty Law Center called Teaching Hard History found that in 2017, only 8% of US high school seniors named slavery as the central cause of the Civil War. And less than 1/3 knew that it had taken a constitutional amendment to abolish it. One of the reasons American children so poorly understand the history and legacy of slavery is because the adults charged with teaching them don't know it very well either. A 2019 Washington Post poll found that only about half of American adults realize that all 13 colonies engaged in slavery. Even educators struggle with the basic facts of history. The SPLC report found only about half of US teachers understand that enslavers dominated the presidency in the decades after the founding and would dominate the US Supreme Court and the US Senate until the Civil War. Of more than 1,700 social study teachers surveyed in the SPLC study, a bare majority said that they felt competent to teach about slavery, and most of them said that available sources and preparation programs had failed them. As the renowned white slavery historian Ira Berlin wrote in an essay in Slavery and Public History, The Tough Stuff of American Memory, the simple truth is that most Americans know little about the 300-year history of slavery in mainland North America with respect to peoples of African descent, and almost nothing of its effect on the majority of white Americans. This is the missing link, that this has affected us almost more than people that were enslaved at this point. And then last but not least, another 2019 Washington Post poll found that despite their meager knowledge of slavery, 2/3 of Americans believe that the legacy of slavery still affects our society today. They can see it, they can feel it, feel the truth of this fact. They just haven't learned a history that helps them understand how and why. We have a chance to change that by starting this education for our students. So my plea, gift for you tonight, my plea is that in learning how to build our second leg, so we can all stand on 2 feet and do this work together, there are educational places available to us to do that on our own, so that when we all come together and talk about it and try to figure out what to do, we know we have a little bit of a clue what we're up against and what we're dealing with. So I wanted to gift you each this. Some of you have already gotten it, but in case you lost it, I'm going to give you another one. This is an organization called the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond, and they do an amazing Undoing Racism and Community Organization workshop that I would recommend. And I'm here tonight to pledge to you that if any of you decide to do this, I'll do it with you. I've taken it before. I'd take it every year if I could, but I will do it with you so that you have somebody to talk to about your experience after you attend. And you can pass that on to anybody you know. And the other gift that I want to give you is along the lines of the difference between equality and equity. I see in your documents, such as the end policy and the conversations that I hear at the CEC committee, that there's a lot of talk about equality and equity, and the terms tend to be used interchangeably. And I get a little bit discombobulated when I'm not exactly sure what someone's meaning by equality and what they're meaning by equity, because they're very, very different. And understanding that difference is critical to the process ahead. And this is something from an organization called White Awake, which is another really good source for this information. They're actually willing to come and teach workshops here. It shows the difference between equality and equity. And you can see that there are 3 blocks in each one, but they have to be redistributed in order to move from equality to equity. And that's a really important distinction that I am hoping that will land with you. So you can, I have one over my desk on the wall. I'm hoping you'll go home and put this one somewhere on your wall so that you can see it and try to understand the differences. It's so important in the conversations that we're having for that to happen. There you go, and I'm gonna leave these with you, Krista. You can use them at your will to pass them out. And once again, thank you for the jobs that you do. I know this is a really difficult thing that you've signed up to do. I know sometimes it feels like you don't have any power to do the things maybe that you really want to do. But I urge you to please not let this slide. This is my 4th year of trying to get into some crack. So that something new can bloom and grow and we can become a better community on behalf of our people of color that attend or may want to eventually work at this school. And I thank you for listening to us tonight. Bless you all. Take care. Have a good meeting.
Thanks.
Appreciate you coming. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Lisa, just one minor comment is, we had our board retreat last month. And one of the sessions was exactly on this, not this exact,
But I actually have a better slide.
But we have
Makes
a
it
couple
to
of.
justice.
Right, take suggestions.
Doesn't that
No, it's
work
good,
though?
that's what I'm just saying.
It works. Yeah.
What you just said just resonated
Thank
with
you very
us.
much. All right. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
Thank you for your work. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate you coming.
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Before we move on, I want to take a moment, not to put you on the spot, but I'm so excited to see our student representative from Community Council. And for new board members who don't know, or if you've forgotten, the Mount Aid Community Council is made up of representatives from each grade. And one of their leadership roles is to assign someone, or sometimes 2 people, to represent the community council and the Mount Aid community on the school board. So can you just introduce yourself to us and tell us what year you are or whatever else you want to share?
So yeah, I'm Isabella Shea. I'm a senior at Mount Aid this year. This is my 2nd year doing this position. Yeah, so community council, we're just like a group of student leaders. It's not even class office per se. That's kind of a little bit separate, but it's similar. We have middle school and high school, so it is 7 through 12. We have about 35 students on our group. And we tried, we passed clubs and just different rules. And recently it was brought in the last couple of years that we need to have, or we should have, a representative at the school board meetings to be more in the loop with what's happening in the community. And yeah, so that's why I'm here.
And I don't know if we have our placards for our names, but
Oh,
in the meantime, if we could go around and introduce ourselves. Before we do, I just want to add that Community Council has been a great connection point for the school board. Liz and I at different times have been able to go. I know they appreciate if we can have a representative to attend, but it can be difficult because during the school day. But we've often gone, and just for being in the building and hanging out with students is awesome. Also, they've been gracious enough to allow us to use that space to get feedback on different things, and that's really powerful. So we're super glad you're here.
Yeah, we just switched our time. It's right now after school now.
Okay,
It's
great.
30 to 3:45.
And people can potentially zoom in.
Yes, I am gonna
So-
try to get that started again.
So I think it sounds like council's just getting going for the year, which is why we're just now seeing
Yes,
Izzy with us.
yes. Yeah, there'll be like an open link that I'll send you.
Okay. Sarah, do you mind starting out with introductions?
Sure, I'm Sarah LaPro. I'm from the Haven.
I'm Mike Dash from Bristol.
Kevin Hansen, Brad Johnson from Starksboro, and I think we will promise, we'd like to see as many of these meetings you should come to. But I think we'll promise, if you're on the agenda, it will be toward the beginning rather than toward the end.
Correct.
Because we have some experience with that.
Yes.
Bailey Lingard from Mountain.
Steve Reed from the Start.
Yeah, I'm different, never small.
Oh, Vicky Boyle, I'm gonna take them. Can you spell your last name?
Shay, S-H-E-I.
And then Krista Seringa from Bristol, and sorry.
Hi, I'm Katrina Ginopoli. I'm assistant superintendent and also live in Mausd.
Patrick Green, superintendent. We had a nice chat the other day.
Good. And Floyd just stepped out for a minute, I think, but
Yeah,
Floyd
he's right.
Davison is our business manager. And he was right here, so.
And I swear I've seen a name tag for you, but I don't see it in the folder. You just passed it up.
And. Go ahead. Thank you. And I was gonna say to Brad's point that regardless, please feel free to excuse yourself here. And also don't hesitate to ask questions. We sometimes move quickly. Oh, yes, thank you. And okay, so Kathy and then Beth.
Kathy Apgar from New Haven.
And I'm Beth McGeorge, Director of Student Support Services.
Okay, great. All right, so next is to approve our agenda. I do have an addition to our executive session for a grievance. I'd like to provide an update on that process. Any other questions, additions? Okay, so can I have a motion to approve the agenda with the addition of grievance to the executive session?
So moved.
In a second,
I'll second, Aaron.
and that was Kathy, Zoom, Vicky. All those in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the motion carries. Our consent agenda, may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved, Steve.
Steve, and a second?
I'll second, Bailey.
Okay, all those in favor of approving the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, we're gonna move on to our executive limitations monitoring. So you should have seen Patrick's monitoring report for policy 2.5, emergency superintendent succession. And so now's our chance to share any feedback you might have or questions you have for Patrick about that report.
I'll move to approve it.
Thank you. Did you need a motion before we can talk about it? Thanks, Steve.
I'll
Can I have a
second.
second? Thanks, Sarah. Okay, now we may discuss the report. Anyone? It was a
The
resounding
most
success.
straightforward, report of all, so.
Lest you be fooled. Okay, so based on the information, based on the information provided, do you find that the interpretation is reasonable? Okay, does the data demonstrate accomplishment of this interpretation? Right, then, all those in favor of approving this monitoring report, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, moving right along. Financial report update. Anybody have any questions? Floyd is-
He's sending that.
Okay.
He left an important document he wanted to have for that very reason.
Should we flip flop and do the Levinson update
Mhm.
instead? Okay. So hopefully you saw in the chair notes that a little bit of context, especially for new folks, about this process that brought us to working with Nate and his team. And it's been a while since we've had an update, thanks to the folks who've asked a few times now when we might get another update. And so here we are to hear where things stand now.
And something, an email came out this afternoon, with a written update, and I have hard copies if that's more conducive for
That would
folks.
be great.
There's 2 or 3 there.
You want a hard copy? We're gonna make our way around.
And I don't know what works for folks. I'm sure you haven't had a chance to read it because it just came out at 3 o'clock or something, maybe even after that today. So do you want to just take a couple of minutes and read through, or I can walk you
Yes.
through it, whatever your preference is. Read through.
How about we take 3 to 5 minutes to take a look on our own, and then we can walk through it with Patrick. Look up when you finished reading it. How about that? So I know if you're ready to move to
I
conversation.
got it here.
There are only 2 copies.
There are only a couple of hard copies, but we received it from Jennifer at 3:18, so it should be in your inbox.
Not much more to add than what's in the document there, but happy to answer any questions they might have.
I have a question. First, I thought it was pretty helpful and clear and all that, so that's good. I remember from the, I don't have the Levinson report in front of me, but I remember there were several things that Nate and his colleagues recommended regarding, if I'm not mistaken, the sister schools, the coaching, and then, of course, central office, collaboration to reduce costs in the central office. It seems to me, can you correlate what you put in the memo today with some of those things? Because obviously there's some overlap there, I would assume.
Yeah, there's definitely some overlap. Certainly the wearing of multiple hats is in that
Right.
broader context of cost-effective mindset. That's sort of
Right.
it's kind of the umbrella term for the work that we launched into with Nate. And the work with Nate definitely touched on that, but also talked a lot more about process. So part of what Nate did with Carlo was interview everyone on the admin team and kind of use some of that interview information to inform their work with us going forward. Big picture was cost effectiveness mindset, and process was an important component to getting people into that frame of thinking. And so process drove most of our time with Nate, specifically the decision-making process that could help with some things that are not necessarily directly related to cost effectiveness mindset, but is a tool to help us have the conversations about cost effectiveness. I would say staffing rules is another area that we spent considerable time with, that we'll continue to spend time in, that is pretty directly related to cost effectiveness mindset. So those are the 2 that I think have that direct relationship. The staffing rules has been really helpful, and in fact, we used those when we were, so Moncton has a good example where they had an influx of students that wasn't necessarily expected, and we leaned on, because we'd had these conversations in March, I think, we were able to lean on some of our work in creating those staffing rules to be equitable in the staffing levels that we have, and in particular, in light of the enrollment increase at Moncton. So when we saw that a kindergarten was going to be over 20, our staffing rules said we don't have kindergartens that are over 20. The exception being if we get an unexpected influx in August and we'd already made all the plans, it's unlikely we're going to be able to add a teacher, completely reconfigure all the students and redistribute them to different classroom teachers. So we might make an exception in that case, but so we leaned on that and informed our decision-making, and it didn't contain cost in that regard, but it did help us ensure that Moncton wasn't getting more or less than another school would get in a similar situation.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, but obviously the Levinson report was commissioned because of declining enrollments and increased costs. And he identified, at least for those 3 areas that I mentioned, like almost $1.8 million in cost savings. Have you been able, you and Floyd, maybe been able to connect some of this effort to actual cost savings or not?
It's hard to tell because of the indirect correlation sometimes. So there are positions that we didn't fill intentionally.
Right.
And because of our work with Nate and cost effectiveness mindset, hearing Nate's thoughts on that sort of that concept of middle management, the challenge. So Nate's sort of idea was sort of less people in what he saw as those middle management positions and more stipending of people to do some of that work. And he also cited doing so by taking advantage of attrition, not necessarily, pushing people out of jobs. So I would say we have taken advantage of attrition and there's direct cost savings there. We haven't calculated the cost savings from taking advantage of attrition specifically related to this idea of our work with Nate. We could quantify that, at least a ballpark quantify. So beginnings, I guess. And that was also part of what Nate said was this is something that happens over a period of
Oh, yeah,
time
sure,
as you
over
take
time.
advantage of attrition, et cetera. I think we're on the right track with that.
Okay.
So an example that might be more directly related to, I think, what we were thinking Nate was talking about would be like a teacher leader taking over an instructional coach position as well as taking on their normal duties. That multiple hat being something of that nature that might reduce a central office staff.
Yep, that building principal is another specific example that Nate gave of, a building principal acting as coach.
Mhm,
Could also reduce the need for how many people we have in the coaching position.
right.
The challenge, which I touched on a little bit here, especially thinking about building principal as an example, the realities of the multiple hats in a system that has unfilled positions and staffing shortages, et cetera. I mean, they're out of necessity wearing multiple hats. So to add another hat of coach on top of that, the concern would be that coaching doesn't happen because there are any number of things that would trump the, getting in the classrooms and doing that coaching work. And that's critically important work to happen. So that's the challenge in actualizing that.
And it sounds like from on the top of pages, but the second page of your summary,
Mhm.
the first paragraph after the itemized numbers. So you're sort of still working on switching the front end process from a central office instigated process to something that's maybe more group brainstormed.
Yeah, starting with that brainstorming step is really key. And that informs then the draft that's created by the central office leaders. That then is reflected on and feedback received from building leaders.
Kind of reminds me of what we did when we as a school board brainstormed with people from around the district in order to come up with 7 ideas several years ago in the cafeteria, right? So we put all those up and and then it was narrowed down from there. Like, I feel like that was a really good example of that.
Mhm.
And then, sorry, my question was about. Say when I'm doing the board highlights for this meeting, so what would, you mentioned like not necessarily ready to go into the class sizes. I feel like that's a little too specific for highlights anyways, but just I'll just kind of do a little short summary of some of the work that's been going on. And the bounded autonomy will have a lot to do with staffing, right? So that's a good start on that. And then, right, how can they work within their system to make decisions and have some autonomy, but with the bounds of equity across services, right? And then he kind of, in his report, had a layout in some ways. I don't know if they would work or apply to our schools. He had like, for every 100 students, one XYZ, like, could we kind of put some of that? Or just discuss it and make sure everyone's okay with it and then take some of the numbers he already developed?
Yeah, and some of those actually feed into the staffing rules. So one of the examples is one instructional coach for every 20 classroom teachers. So that's part of the conversation that we're having as a leadership team as we develop staffing rules that sort of all gonna play by. And to me, the value of the staffing rules is, I think there's the cost effectiveness approach is there in that work, but it's also, come the end of the school year, as we're starting to finalize decisions for the following school year, it isn't each principal doing their best to convince me of what they need for staffing. We've made the rules ahead of time before we even knew what the need was going to be, and we're going to lean on those rules to make those decisions so that it helps ensure that we have equity across our schools as well. So I think there's a cost containment and there's definitely equity.
Are there positions outside of the two that you have as examples in here that principals would be able to have more autonomy on?
When you say positions, I mentioned two that we went through this decision-making process on.
Right,
There are definitely other positions that we would go through. Like, so whether they had more or less autonomy is unclear.
You'd
What would
still
be
set
clear
rules up
is
ahead of time.
we would work together to determine who has what responsibilities and authority in the series of decisions that need to be made around any one position. And that was really helpful, sort of the idea being, there are some of those positions need 2 yeses to go forward. And if they don't get 2 yeses, then they don't go forward. Others, it was really clear, there's input from building principals and district leaders, but the ultimate decision is the superintendent. So it's really just, again, through conversation and landing at a place where everyone can at least accept what the decision is and how those decisions will be made. And then we use that going forward. And again, the rules we're not writing the rules in the middle of the game or even late in the game. And that decision-making process isn't exclusive to positions. Like, that can really be a process that we use for more programmatic or systems kinds of decisions as well. Even thinking about the example that we started working through was looking at instructional coaching and philosophies around that, and sort of how we articulate the sort of the rules that will follow around that approach to improving classroom instruction as our sort of universal level of our MTSS.
great. Besides what's highlighted here, and interrupt me if I'm bogarting the conversation here, but do you see any other pieces of Nate's original report that we want to maybe spend time on outside of this process going
Yeah.
forward?
So for sure, as I said in here, going forward, bounded autonomy is going to be something we're going to dig into, even as we're thinking about the budget building process. Bounded autonomy has a role in building a budget, managing a budget. So that's going to start probably where that conversation starts with that. In terms of the other things that Nate said, I think one lingering thing that's kind of a big deal is, what do we intend to do with 6th grade? That just sort of is kind of hanging out there. A lot of other districts around us are moving forward with that work. It's a conversation we should have, even if the decision is to stay as it is. We should make that a conscious decision. He definitely highlighted that as, it's definitely not low-hanging fruit, but it was one of the more obvious options to consider, I think, out of that report.
Liz? So, I assume that factored in a little bit on the 5th and 6th grade class size. They did watch for Giants have their conversations about 5th graders. I guess there is so much about them being a part of the middle school model 5 through 8. Even if it's to not change anything, like you said, that's a possibility, everything doesn't change, but to not totally lose that in our conversations as a part of it. It's 25 students. I wonder, there's just, what classroom in our elementary schools are the classrooms, do they fit 25 kiddos? Right, like things like that. So if there's something that the school board or community engagement, or I feel like would those conversations be initiated internally first and then come to us to process, or are we would we, if we decided we wanted to start those conversations and then bring them into you, do you think?
I think that would be something. So I learned a few lessons in the process we've engaged in over the last several years.
Right.
One of those is be careful about being the one that puts the idea on the table. So I would happily explore that deeply in support of the board's request to do so. But I would look for the board's direction that, hey, we want to really look at this moving of 6th grade or 5th and 6th grade And then we can bring lots of information, we can bring perspectives, we can bring recommendations. But ultimately, I think it's important for the board to drive that. And I think another lesson learned is options.
Right.
So not sort of a dichotomous, it's this or stay the same, but we can do A or we can do B, or we can keep it as is. And kind of see what the community response is. And knowing that the community response is really important. And as a board of trustees, you are the informed agent. And the community may or may not be as informed, and you have to make decisions as a board that you believe are in the best interest of the district. Even if sometimes that's inconsistent with what the community is asking for.
That will be something to unpack at a later date,
For
sure.
2027.
Perhaps not in my tenure. But for sure, but I don't want us to get too far ahead on that topic because there is a lot to talk about there. I just want to see if there are any other comments about this. Yeah.
I guess, I'm struggling a little bit with the operating 4 elementary schools. And they're all different. And I mean, we try to do make equal programming and all this kind of stuff, and I'm sure it's better than it was, but I'm not sure it's where it should be. We've had different examples shown, through discussions with principals and stuff that really highlight the differences in each one of those sites. So when you talk about bounded autonomy, that makes me a little nervous. I know it's not new and it's something that, Nate had talked about, but then again, your reference to a coach has 20 teachers. Now, there's not too many schools that you can support that. So does that mean that we're gonna start cross-pollinating to some degree to get a coach that has 21st, second grade teachers or something like that, or is it still gonna be siloed within each site?
So right now, coaches are shared across schools already. So because you're sitting in the only school that has 20 classroom teachers. So using that ratio, and we're not at that ratio right now necessarily. But if we're using that ratio, they would have to be in multiple schools.
Which seems like a good thing.
Yeah, there are definitely pros and cons, yep. But I see the pros more so for an instructional coach. And the alternative, and we've had these conversations too, is asking instructional coaches to be an instructional coach and something else to stay in one building. The challenge there is really holding the line so that if you're a half-time coach and a half-time interventionist, you're actually spending half of your time as a coach and half of your time as an interventionist, when the need and the desire will always be to do more intervention. And then we're trading a proactive measure of instructional coaching for a reactive measure, which only perpetuates the challenge that we're facing right now. So our approach has been coach is coach. And if that means they have to be in multiple buildings to do coaching, then that's preferred over what we feel is a risk to sustaining the coaching.
Well, the only other comment I have is, this particular exercise was driven by a budgetary forecast that we were trying to solve potential budget crisis. This was one of the things that was proposed as a solution to that, along with the merger and other discussions. 5th or 6th grade movement is also one of those other tools that was on the chart for dealing with declining enrollment and a future budget issue. It might make sense as an update to this to update the budgetary problem.
Agreed.
Because how much of any of this is necessary and what we should be concentrating on is a little difficult without you know, the state level funding mechanism has changed enough that a lot of this cliff we were looking at has been assuaged to some extent. But, you know, what's driving the need to do more of this?
I think that'll be a natural component to the building of FY 25 is we're now gonna be projecting out post ESSER with all the changes that you just described that have taken place. It's sort of the
Waiting for.
new reality, exactly. And what does that new reality look like and what do we have to do to adapt to that new reality?
And I think also, I mean, maybe it does ultimately come down to the budget, but are there things beyond the budget that a declining enrollment impacts?
Mhm.
That may still be there even if the financial pressure has alleviated, so.
Sure.
Yeah.
It'd be good to have those identified.
I noticed Barb has joined us. Hi, Barb. I don't want to put, well, I am gonna put you on the spot, because we're joined by our, student representative today, who I don't think you've had a chance to meet, and she's here from the community council. So if you could just introduce yourself and then maybe you could introduce yourself to Barb.
Hi there, I'm Barb Crandall and I represent Moncton on the school board.
Yeah, hi, I'm Isabella Shea, and I'm the student executive.
Nice to meet you.
Alright. Okay, are we good to move on? But not forgotten. All right, financial report, Floyd is here, so. Does anyone have any questions, Stephen? Looking at you. But it could be anybody really who has any questions or anything you want to share.
I do, you'll see, the fund balance. Excuse me, the capital fund reserve is still carrying 1.7 million. That reflects, the $438,000 add, less what we pulled out for covering the shortfall in the lobby. We ended up with about $8,000 difference with that add. Additionally, finishing the year, we got a little bit more money unanticipated for special ed revenue on extraordinary costs. So those numbers may be a little bit different than they are different than what you've seen. And just to explain those going forward, so you have that basis on the front page. Good news.
Thank you.
So I have a comment. I think at the top of the title bar or the header, it says 22-23 budget. No, we're in 23-24, aren't we?
We are. Theoretically.
And then I guess the other question is the budget variance. There's a lot of dollars in the people categories, which is most of the budget anyway. But is that because we're early in the year and you haven't committed that money, or is that because we have there's a lack of staffing that's generating those surpluses?
The simple answer is yes. It's the combination of those two items. You know, one, we're early in the year. There'll be funds encumbered as we go through the year, but we'll also have open positions that we can't encumber until we have someone in that slot.
There's a lot of chunk of change here.
And it adds up fast with staff and benefits easily pushing 6 figures. You know, when you're at $30,000, $34,000 for a family medical plan on the benefit side, it gets there pretty quick with hiring someone with even marginal experience.
Is this report, it looks like the headers have been changed a little bit from the way you were doing it last year. Is that true? Like, got some new categories.
Are you in the front page or?
Yeah, the front summary.
Hmm,
Um,
I'm not seeing much of a difference there. Pull one up from last year.
for some reason, I don't recall seeing in the second. In the second column from the right, that you were estimating what actual and encumbered was going to be. I didn't get a chance to pop open the old one. So it looked like, whether or not you had something encumbered, you were estimating what your encumbrances were gonna be.
Sorry, opened up. Superintendent. Financial. No, that's the same.
Okay,
You carry that quite well.
all right. I did notice that the expenditures pages seem to match up with this month's summary page.
I did notice that I checked that to make sure.
Anything else? Thank you.
It's early in the year, we're not gonna spend that money yet, but the nice thing on finishing last year and being able to carry a capital reserve of 1.7 when we were 6-7 months ago, as we went into that vote in March, asking for an ability to cover up to that amount, should that shortfall happen. It gives us a much better financial position going forward for the board to be able to direct funds.
So we're moving into the board management and governance section. My hopes and dreams are that we will get through this by 8 before we go into executive session, and maybe even a little before. We have a lot there, but we'll see how we do. So first of all, thanks folks for doing your monitoring reports and getting them in. How'd it go for you, Mike? How was it?
It was okay, I think.
Yeah.
That I worried that maybe I kept a little too close to the previous version, right? And so trying to figure out how much we're recreating a monitoring that occurred a year ago and how much we're really novelly assessing what this year went that I struggled a little bit with.
Yeah.
And then the other challenge was having come in partway through the year.
Right.
It was somewhat difficult to really speak to a lot of the activities that occurred that I wasn't around for.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I think the structure and the format and having those resources made it feasible. If sometimes feeling a little bit uncertain as to like, is it fulfilling fully the role that it should in terms of like a full monitoring?
Yeah.
As opposed to sort of something between fitting a pattern.
Yeah.
Right. And also monitor.
Yeah. And I think that's like an ongoing question too.
Yeah.
And especially coming in midway through the year is hard. Probably we could have thought about that a little bit better for you doing this one. But
no, otherwise I thought it was good, and it was very helpful to have Liz's feedback and then knowing that she was around there to make sure we weren't way off course. It's really nice.
great. All right, so we need a motion to approve the monitoring report for 3.1 Unity Control.
I will.
Sarah?
Yeah.
And a second?
I'll second.
Erin? Okay, any questions, comments, discussion about the report and the policy? Okay, seeing none, based on the information provided, do you find that the interpretation is reasonable? Yes. Based on the information provided, does the data demonstrate accomplishment of this interpretation? Okay, all those in favor of approving monitoring report for 3.1, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you, folks, for doing that. And next we have the group effort with some bringing it to the finish line by Steve at the end. So can I have a motion to approve the monitoring report for policy 4.1 governing style?
Aaron.
And a second?
A second, Sarah.
Okay, so comments, questions, discussion.
So this thing really goes over 2 years.
Yeah.
Covers
Well,
2
we
years.
never
Oh, wow.
formally, approved it last time.
So it was done and then it just didn't get on the agenda for actual approval. And so Steve noted that when he was looking at it.
Yeah, I
Because-
see that, and I was like, wow.
And, you know, it was interesting because it sort of gave me the benefit of looking at what we had said about it before and what actually has happened since.
Mm,
So. A few of the things we've made progress on.
I guess to that point, Steve, do we change the compliance like in,
I didn't
Number
want to,
one.
I didn't want to change what the previous group had said about the time period previously.
Yep.
I just wanted to know, afterwards, it was usually if you're non-compliant or partially compliant, there's some discussion of how you're going to move forward, and so I sort of elaborate on that. I can't,
and some of them were not there yet anyway.
we're not there yet anyway, and this is also one of those difficult ones where full compliance is kind of
We may never
an
get.
ongoing thing. You
Yep,
know, it's like,
yeah.
we're striving for full compliance. Patrick knows how that goes, but we may always be striving.
Sarah, did you have something?
No, I appreciated having been on the first round of it, the follow-up statements, and I think it was helpful anyway to kind of have a little bit of a recent history embedded in the monitoring report.
Okay, there's no further discussion. Based on the information provided, do you find that the interpretation is reasonable? And does the data demonstrate accomplishment of this interpretation? Okay, all those in favor of approving monitoring report 4.1, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention? Kathy, do you have your hand up with a question? Okay, thanks. Okay. All right, next up is an action to accept the facilities committee recommendation for central office plan. I did want to say that I think we recognize that we might not take action this evening. Sometimes it's hard if we haven't had a chance to discuss, to assume we're then going to take action at the very same meeting. But having the action on there, because it's a warned meeting, allows us to do so if we are ready to do that. So in order to discuss this recommendation, we need a motion to accept it.
So moved, Aaron.
And a second?
I'll second, Sarah.
Okay, so let's talk. Do you folks from the facilities committee want to provide any context, or should we just dive in? How would you like to do this?
Well, we talked at length about different aspects, and none of them, they were all from the presentation, pretty much what we talked about over the last several years about what to do with central office. There's a lot of concern, there was a lot of discussion about the I don't know, attitude's not a good word, but the mindset of voters as to purchasing a building. That was juxtaposed with it's really least disruptive, least cost. It certainly makes sense to do that from a variety of reasons. There was a lot of discussion. I mean, for our last meeting, we had a couple of items that we were going to talk about, and this one pretty much took the whole meeting. And there was a lot of discussion about future uses. what are we protecting by keeping it out of school buildings, if you will? And whether the future uses that we see today, if they're real or not, or if there are other ones, conversely, that we don't see today. So, and it wasn't a unanimous decision, as I noted in the preamble, it was a majority decision, which is reflective of, you know, that struggle between doing what appears to make sense as opposed to doing something that probably by the majority seems to think is the right decision, and it's what obviously the superintendent is recommending as well. Few other things, there's more, the con list is a lot longer. But that's not so much to take away from the recommendation. I mean, there's discussion about, you know, moving it to a smaller school that has a lot of space while you're taking it out of a area where there's a focus on, well, not focus, but there is the reality of the major school population is within certainly walking distance, if not driving distance. There would be a removed piece of property from the Bristol grand list as a percentage of the grand list. I don't know what that would be. Operating costs, we're already paying a certain amount of operating costs through CAM charges, so it's not like we're gonna pick up an exorbitant amount of CAM costs or maintenance costs, because we're already paying a certain amount of CAM costs, which would continue as well. And we're not buying the Taj Mahal either. We're buying a rigid frame pre-engineered building that's been converted to office space that would have some residual values, so. That's kind of where we landed.
Sarah?
So, you just elaborate, the one thing that isn't in on this is, at least a range of money? Is that possible to? They were all, I remember, about the same, but I don't know if that would be helpful to put into this document about what we're actually talking about here, so.
So essentially moving into any school building, and there are a few different options that we could discuss, or we have discussed, and we've gotten some figures. We're looking at 1.5 to 2 million for, depending on the space and all of that, and that's using figures, so estimates we got at various points in time along the way as we've explored various options, and we used, I think, a 6% cost escalator from the date of those, so annually 6% more to get us in the ballpark. We didn't feel like we're close enough to a decision to spend probably tens of thousands of dollars to work with architects and actually drill down to get bid specs together to actually get a decent cost estimate. But we can certainly do that if we felt that was important. So that's sort of on the, if we move into a school side of things, really hard to know from if we decide to lease elsewhere. In our exploration, there isn't elsewhere to lease, not within the 4 towns that make up our district. Perhaps if we thought having our central office located outside of the district, that opens up other opportunities. Our belief was we're probably still looking at, so if it's a build to suit, we're still paying for the purchase and the construction and the upfit just over the life of the lease. So it's probably still going to be in that over 10 years plus probably 1.5 million. And the purchase of the central office building is estimated to be around 1.2. You know, there we'd go through and get an updated assessment on that and see if that's still real or not, but that's what we believe it will be, somewhere in that neighborhood.
And some of our numbers are a little firmer than others, you know, you take a high level on what it might cost to renovate the gray building based on a 2018 estimate. And contrast that to the we really did drill in on Beaman a little bit when we were considering merging districts, and you know, that number is pretty tight. and fairly accurate at the time. So we think that the numbers that are a little bit older reflect the newer numbers and their impact as well. So there's some confidence, relative confidence.
So Kathy has her hand up.
Oh, thank you. Go ahead, Kathy.
I think that we do not have accurate numbers here. And coming off a debacle with Mausd project, I think that that was a huge hit for the district and not being sound fiscal agents when it comes to building purchases and renovations. We don't have any number here. I actually asked for them 2 weeks ago and I've gotten nothing in response. And that's worrisome to me that this committee has been asked to present something on numbers we do not have. There is nothing that says we need another whole building. I haven't seen any income projections on the proposed purchase of this building. There's no planned programming. And why do we need all that space? If you lose one of the tenants that's in there, we don't have another program to fill it. We would be in a landlord position, which is not what our primary purpose is here. We're here to guarantee sound education for students, not to be landlords. And I think that the fact that there's a concern about disrupting central office, we're not talking 100 people for 3 months. We're talking, I think the numbers you threw out, Patrick, were maybe 6, that you already have 4 that are taking squat spots, and there's already central office staff located on that 3rd floor at Beeman Elementary. So in good conscience, I can't take another property off the tax rolls in Bristol. I'm very uncomfortable with it without having solid costs and estimates. And when we talk about, removing central office from the majority of staff, we're talking 4 miles, less than 7 minutes to get from point A to point B. And how often does your average staff member ever go to central office? I mean, look, we're having our meetings by Zoom. I think that there's a lot here to consider that we don't have the facts for, and I would not be comfortable presenting this to taxpayers.
I feel like this topic is, in my mind, very intertwined with what do we do with 6th or 5th and 6th graders. I am a huge proponent of a separate physical space for middle school, away from high school. And I feel like depending on what happens with those decisions would greatly sway what my opinion would be on whether we buy a building or revamp. And, who goes where and where there's space could drastically change when we talk about 6th graders or 5th, 6th, or whatever that looks like. So I think it's hard to make a decision on this without considering that bigger picture of other situations.
Well, I think that goes to the point that even though it's ambiguous as to what we might be using schools for in the future, it makes sense to keep the opportunity for that type of thinking for the school buildings as opposed to encumbering it with an administrative function.
I agree with Kevin. I mean, I think that I understand your point, but regardless of whether 6th grade ends up in, 5th grade ends up as 6th grade, whatever we do, however we configure the middle school, you still have to have an administrative function. So either way, that doesn't pull it away. I'm inclined to support the committee's recommendation, largely because I think we would, by sticking And Kat's point, I agree with it. We need to have, maybe we need to have some more numbers. But I think we would be compromising our future flexibility by sticking administrative functions into one of the existing schools. And we would be limiting our flexibility in the future.
Kathy, I see your hand up. Is that from before or nope? Oh, Steve, thank you.
So what is the roundabout purchase price?
1.2.
Okay, and as Kathy noted, that would make us landlords. Do we have the legal ability to be landlords?
I haven't asked that question, but we can own property. And we've been talking this through with legal. I do believe it came in conversation that there were current tenants, so yeah, I'm not aware of anything that would prevent that. I can ask that specific question.
Just curious whether or not we have
I
that.
think that was also something that we spent a little time researching when we were talking about space and perhaps leasing out space in our building for community outreach, doctor's office, that sort of stuff.
Right,
And that seemed to pass muster.
okay.
I believe there's other districts, I don't know if they're leasing or landlords, but there are private preschools and daycares within school buildings. I don't know if the legality of, what terms are where.
Yeah, and I don't know whether those districts, the voters gave the board
Right.
the authority to do that sort
Yeah,
of thing.
that's a good point.
That's the question.
Those buildings that have leased space to early childhood programs, it's considered an educational purpose. It's not considered, those are not considered commercial entities or used for commercial purposes.
Right.
It could have an effect on tax liability. If you're renting out space to a
If
commercial.
we're making turning a profit on something.
For-profit,
Mhm.
enterprise.
So
Sarah?
anyway,
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Steve.
and then the last thing was just, right now there's 2 extra tenant spaces.
Is effectively a third that is still carved out. So you have Bristol Works, which is the current owner and landlord. The group that is still housed in there but not using space, that lease hasn't terminated yet.
Okay,
And I think that there's a relationship with the current owner to use that space in some agreement with that leaseholder. And then the lease with the police department, which, indications are that they're looking to build over with the fire station and combine there.
mhm. I think the last time we went through this, one thing that popped up in my head was whether or not it was possible to solicit for a new owner. So that we could just continue to lease from somebody else,
Mhm.
which in the end would be probably the least expensive option out of everything we could do.
Well, I think the
If somebody
net,
else was willing to take over the building.
the net cost on ownership is a positive $132,000 per year to the district, which is why you've got that 9-year payback. Is somebody coming in and purchasing it and negotiating a new lease with us, it's unlikely we would get the same terms we have currently.
Sure, I mean,
And-
I'm sure you would take a.
And if the property goes on the market, there's no guarantee that it will go to someone who wants tenants.
Or once
Right.
you as a tenant.
Right, I won't take that personally.
No. You know what I said.
But to that point
Yes, that's
is in the very near future. October of 24, our lease ends. We have one opportunity to renew. So we're talking about less than, or about 2 years to be able to do something, assuming the property doesn't sell and the new owner doesn't want to exercise, or doesn't allow that exercise of the lease because they're going to take the space. Having said that, there should be a degree of discomfort with that short time frame in our decision making. We don't have, 2 years sounds like a long time. It scares me.
I think important also to recognize, like we've been in these conversations with the current owner of our building for 3 years now. If we don't make a decision, then he's likely to make a decision for us and taking that option off the table, which is fine if that's the direction we want to go, but we just need to know that we've been deliberating for quite a long time. He's anticipating at least a decision from the board at some point about what direction the board wants to go in, knowing that ultimately, and I don't know, I don't remember if this was in the report or not, but ultimately the board needs authority to purchase property from the electorate. So we would have to have an Australian ballot vote to authorize the board to do so. So ultimately the community gets to decide on that. And I've had that conversation with Kevin, he knows that. But if the board takes several months more to make a decision about what direction it wants to go in, I don't know if 3 months from now, this option is still on the table.
Sarah.
A couple points. I'm kind of leaning this way, just I have been comfortable with this plan because I feel like it's, as long as it's written in that it's not sold back to the town of Bristol for $1 or something silly like that, that it's also something you can sell. Again, should we want to adjust our plans? It also could be an opportunity, made me think when Bailey was talking, to you could put in, you know, a larger childcare center or something like that and adjust its, I don't know if it's zoned in a specific way, but we could try to create that kind of connection and create something that's kind of lacking in the community. Or enough of, I guess. And then finally, I'm just curious on the cost differential for, so I'm assuming we pay for it all at once. Do we pay for it like, and then, or are we paying it off in, you said 9 years, or?
So the payback would be 9 years based on that number, that 1.2 million. But I think the expectation would be writing the check, paying for it, maybe bridging 24 and 25 in a June, July payment structure, depending on cash flow. I don't see financing it as a great alternative.
No. And what's the lease amount per year? Just a quick reminder.
75 or something.
80 with all in, it's at 86,071 based on last year's.
It's not that much more over 10 years than, and we would be taking in potential rent from something.
Right, rather than 86,000 a year going out, we would have an estimate of 132 coming in.
So I think the
net
document needs
effect
to
is,
have, like, I mean, I like that the decision making is a little bit about thought process and options, but I think the next level with having more numbers is like, that's like all pros to me that we're missing.
I might just add one little thing, which is, I agree, I think the numbers argument, at least from what I'm hearing here, seems to make a lot of sense. The only small bit of caution that I have is thinking about what else we might be asking for from the community. I'd hate to oversaturate our asks if there are other alternatives. So if this really is the best solution and we don't think that it's gonna look like us coming with our hands out again and again and again, and you start to get some fatigue from the voters, that would be my worry. And I don't really have a good sense of if there are other big projects or bond efforts that we are considering moving forward. But if so, it might be worthwhile thinking about this relative to that, to make sure that we don't run into that risk of asking too much, even if they're the right things to ask for what it's worth.
And I think it's important to, in this conversation, to recognize that if we move to a Beaman, for example, which is the next least expensive purchase, and we need to think of that as a purchase. It's 1.4 million based on Truex's estimates, taking advantage of the $500,000 of ESSER funds to bring in the HVAC in there. Right, so that number is significantly lower than market price. So when you look at it in terms of the other spaces as alternatives, that $500,000 doesn't come. So having the ability to have an elevator, those other costs that you would need, that we can supplement the HVAC piece by tucking into that ESSER money, allowing us to have more funds for an elevator as compared to putting it on the second floor over here. And once you spend that 1.2 million at Beaman as the next least expensive item versus the 1.2 to purchase it, it's a sunk cost. If you need to put kids back into those buildings, that 1.2 million, you'll still have the $500,000 of HVAC that went in, but that 1.2 million will now be taken out to create classroom space again. And every other option is more expensive than that.
Yeah, anyone who hasn't spoken yet, and then we'll go back to Kathy that wants to. Okay, Kathy.
I guess I'm just kind of curious. This is the first thing I'm hearing about putting $500,000 in HVAC. I haven't seen, I don't know, maybe the board has. I haven't seen any kind of a capital improvement plan, because it would seem as though that it's not just Beaman that needs a new HVAC system. I mean, if the climate is going to continue to warm as predicted, then all of our schools are going to need HVAC at one time. And I heard two conflicting numbers here. First, it was 1.4 million to do Beaman, and now it was 1.2 to do Beaman. And
1.2, it is 1.45, 0.175.
And that's based on old numbers. We all agree that.
Based on numbers from last year with Truex.
And who is Truex, please?
Collins, our architect.
Okay. So if we look at how do we arrive at $132,000 profit? Is that what I understood when you said that there would be $132,000 payback?
Sure. If you don't have 86,000 going out and you have 55,000 coming in, that's a net change of cash flow position of 132,000 a year.
So $55,000 is a guarantee. I thought I just heard you also say that there's no guarantee that the tenants that are there, other than the Bristol Police Department, are going to remain. So we're dealing with a lot of unknowns and a steadily decreasing enrollment. Correct? So it would be hard to project $132,000 payback if we don't have the numbers for definite contracts for the space, and we don't know what the costs are to maintain that. I read in the superintendent's report that facilities is understaffed and having a hard time now, and we're adding another building to that, a building which we don't even own the parking lot for, but we would still have to share some cost for maintaining that with somebody else. So I guess I'm still curious about that 132, if that's really a realistic number.
The snapshot in time. You know, that's the current position. Assuming we continued, it would probably go up. Right? Rent's not going down. Should we continue to hold a lease position with the police department, for example?
I'm sorry, I thought I just heard you said the police department's looking to move over with the fire department.
It's on the table, but, you know, as in our discussion, is it etched in concrete or sand at this point?
Other thoughts? Bailey?
I just wanted to remember, almost this time last year, we're having a discussion about how we're allowed or how we should formulate questions to the voters. And if I remember correctly, giving them a choice of yes, like, yes, approve this or no, but like, we can't say, oh, option A or option B, right?
Only as like a straw poll.
Okay.
You can't put an actual vote out that way.
And that wouldn't allow us to, let's say there was a resounding, yeah, buy the property, that wouldn't give us the power to actually buy the property. We'd
Not
have
a
to
straw
have
poll,
another, okay.
You'd have to have an officially warned election
Okay.
and, yeah. Tina did get back and say that we can be landlords.
So I'm looking at the time and I just would like to get a sense from folks if we need to chew on this ourselves and come back at our next meeting. Prepared to take action, so.
The presentations that were on, the capital improvements plans and this from whenever they were, if those could be just like made front and center again, I think, because we have been presented all of this information in the past, and so I wanna maybe just check on them and make sure it's have them be updated, and so that
Yes.
what we're working with.
So our capital improvement plan and then the presentation that you and Floyd did with,
Back in March.
then that was in March, okay, but.
And was there another one that would be helpful? I'm just, if we end up deciding to chew on this, which I'm potentially leaning or guessing we have a little bit to do, there's another documents we should think of.
But I think that the challenge is like, so there've been a couple of comments saying about getting more numbers. Like, there's an infinite number of numbers we can get. I would guess I'm gonna need direction from you as a board, like help me get clarity on what numbers don't you have that you want to have to be able to make a decision.
I just wanna see them again.
Yeah,
ones
so
you've
I think what I
already
heard
done.
Sarah was asking was to.
So not get new numbers,
To get
just-
back
okay.
the information from March, which folks may not have seen, or if they saw it, it was maybe like your first meeting, so it'd be good to maybe revisit that, and then our updated, most current capital improvement plan would be great.
We do have one, a two-page document that just highlights each one of these options based on those projections that we could also share.
Okay.
You're talking about the presentation that the facilities committee saw?
The presentation, but also this one, which
Oh, okay,
I
right.
think you and I chatted about that. The presentation is fed out of these numbers and we updated those in the last couple of days.
Yeah.
And to Patrick's point about numbers, we have to thread that needle of asking for something that's realistic to get in a certain amount of time and with minimal cost, and making sure we have the information we need to make a decision. So knowing that, is there anything other than what we've just shared that the board would like to request?
Is there any other, due diligence that maybe we should do to kind of gauge what impediments there might be to a proposal by the board that we buy that building? Like, for example, I mean, does the town really care about the grand list? Does anybody ask that question? I don't know what the other questions would be, but it seems to me that go down this road, I mean, it sounds like a pretty easy sell to taxpayers, but as we know, we can't predict how taxpayers are gonna vote. So it will be a lot about messaging and effective messaging. But I don't know if there's any other data points that, we might try to unearth as we go through this process.
Are you talking about doing that to help us with our decision?
Yeah, I
Or
mean,
more? Is there anything from the facilities committee that you think of when Brad says that you think was an assumption you made, but it might be worth more clarity?
I think in terms of the grand list, the assumption is that will not be seen favorably by at least the folks in Bristol.
We have an idea what that rank number might be.
I do, but not off the top of my head. I had it. I'll look for it right now.
I'm just curious, what kind of a tax burden hit that is.
And as I indicated before, it might be an offset. I mean, if we're renting out half of the space, the value would still be reflected in the grand list.
And that assumes that if we don't buy it, whomever does is gonna be paying
Right,
taxes.
exactly.
Right, and we don't know that for
Yeah,
sure.
and the town doesn't know that either.
Right.
Right.
So,
And-
am I hearing someone say that by the school district buying a building, you're not going to take it off the tax roll because it will officially be owned by an educational institution and is therefore eligible for exemption from property tax? So that would be something to check with Bristol. When we pay no property tax on any of the buildings that the school district currently owns, that would not be any different.
Yeah, I didn't hear any disagreement with that. I think we're all on the same page in that we agree it will come off of the grand list.
Yeah, I think Steve was
Right.
asking what's the actual impact, like number, what's that number?
Yeah, what's it mean to Bristol?
What does it mean?
The other thing that makes me scratch my head is that we would continue its use as a commercial property, making it potentially a profit on that, but we're not paying taxes.
Well, that's what I was saying, you could pay taxes on it. I mean, if you're a nonprofit organization and you were undertaking for-profit activities, it's a taxable event.
I was gonna say, if there's
So
gotta be
that goes
some,
back to the,
Yes, to go back, so
Gotcha.
like, let's say the thing's worth $1 million. $500,000 is for the school and $500,000 are for for-profit companies. The full $1 million is not gonna come off the grand list.
right,
Presumably, I mean, that's, we need to check with Dina, but.
Right.
That's definitely in the cards.
who's the
Well, how's
best,
that work now? Cause there's two nonprofit entities renting that building.
Well, yeah, but
one of them is a city,
except,
organization.
except that the owner is
Town
a
organization.
for-profit.
Profit, okay.
So that
Because-
was, that's the
But he
opposite.
can't turn
really.
around and
Right. No, he can't.
turn around and say that.
Doesn't work that way.
okay, I think we have a good sense of
You still-
information we'd like before our October meeting. If anything else comes up, feel free to reach out to me and we can see if that's something that we can get for our next meeting.
And I'd just like to reemphasize, like I tried to emphasize the importance of getting to a decision point tonight because we're on borrowed time as it is. If there's something that is needed to be able to make a decision in October, I'd love to know what that is. I'll keep playing nice with Kevin, but at some point, we're gonna have to be understanding if he says, I'm moving in the absence of a decision.
I think the other thing, and maybe you said this in the presentation, can you, in this information, speak to the impact, let's say we did say, no, we don't want to buy the building. We want central office to go at Beaman or Mount April, whatever, the impact of students and the community if a central office were to move to another building.
And I would talk about it in terms of the impact regardless of which community we went to.
Yes,
Because it's the same impact essentially, whichever building we
Yeah.
move into.
yeah, I wanna make kind of, yeah, like, we'd wanna check in with like, oh, what's the impact of Bristol if we were to buy that building, but also like, what's the impact of the Beaman students if we were to have that, use some of that space.
Okay, thank you, facilities committee folks, for the information and thoughtful
So I
discussion.
move we table this.
Oh, yes, thank you. So grateful to you, Steve.
Do we have a motion?
Do we have a
on that?
motion? Oh, we do.
Yeah.
We
So
actually need to take a vote.
yes, vote on the motion
Could you
to,
make an amendment?
I think we have to vote it down.
I think we
first.
have to,
Can you vote it down and then bring it back up?
No, we don't wanna, we just wanna table it.
I think we should modify the amendment to table it.
I would entertain any modification to do it.
We made the original motions.
I think it was
Uh,
me, yeah. Modify to table the facilities committee recommendation for central office plan.
Do we have a second?
I seconded it, I think originally.
Okay.
I will second that.
Okay. All right, all those in favor of modifying the motion on the table to table the motion to accept the facilities committee recommendation, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, do we need to do something else? Have we moved it to table it?
Or you would
Well,
just amend
probably, if you're being stickler about it, you would then vote on tabling it. Cause you voted on amending it.
Yep, okay,
I'm sorry, can you clarify?
what's happening?
That
we
one
don't-
was just to amend the motion to table. So from the previous motion to table it, so to approve that amendment. Now with that amendment, approving the motion. to table.
So you made a motion.
Motion
You
to
made a motion
amend,
to
and now it's a
amend,
motion to act on
to
that
table,
amendment.
and now you're.
And now we need a motion to table the action item.
So moved.
Steve, and a second.
I'll second, Sarah.
Sarah, all those in favor of tabling the action, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, I'm gonna hand this over to Erin to talk about board member participation and attendance at school events.
So this comes off of many discussions about the ownership linkage plan, building a relationship within the community, and changing our dynamic with how we're seen in the community. From all the wonderful events we've gone through the past couple of years, which seems like a lot longer. So I know there's been some discussion around how do we embed ourselves? What is our place to embed ourselves in the community? So there's a link in the agenda that links to, I think the one in here is to Tandem, which is the overall capture of what's going on at any given time at Mount Aid. And unfortunately, is it just Mount Aid, Patrick, or do we get elementary schools as well in here?
I think everyone uses Tandem.
Okay, I can figure out how to see the
Like how would you?
the other schools.
Robinson.
You may have to go. You may have to go to that school, because I know like our facilities uses Tandem to know what events are happening in different places. and-
I put Beaman in the search at the top, and then I got school-wide family barbecue on the 8th and Beaman open house. I think that's the
Okay,
way.
so if you just search individually, okay. But for example, like the Bristol open house was the other night, which was great and well attended, I think. So just things like that in your own community you could attend, but certainly as a board member, your attention should be shared on all the towns as equally as important. Even though you represent your specific town you're elected to, because we're a merged district, we have the same level of attention for all the schools underneath us. I know sometimes it's hard to do the balance between policy and governance and not getting into the means of things with wanting to be involved in your community. And there's many ways we can be involved as board members, which kind of remove us from our board member role while we're doing them, but being a volunteer for certain things, or even like we just went over, showing up to certain events, even going to different games or anything like that, just puts you into the involvement category. And when the ownership linkage plan comes out, there's going to be certain things identified as what would be nice for people to do to sort of embed ourselves. We want to be respectful too of our educators' time and the principals' time, and you know, if we're going to create relationships with them, making sure that we're doing our due diligence to make sure we have planned out our time with them accordingly. And we really want this to be a building block to move forward and sort of a positive mindset as we're, instead of looking back in the rear view saying, you know, this is how things used to be. We used to be able to connect with our community in certain ways. We want to move forward in new ways and put ourselves out there. Did I miss anything? Or does anybody have any thoughts about community connections? Or how it feels or what it looks like or what the
I think it
challenges
can be
are?
hard, you know, because folks might only see you as a board member, so they might want to share with you things they have on their mind in your role as a board member, and really, you know, you have to sort of just be a listener, but not really, just keep in mind that, you know, we can't solve folks' problems. We can just really listen and direct them to who can. But I think, you know, it's easy if you have kids in the school to go to those schools, but I also think there's some value, and I have to do this myself, to being in places where you might not always be. I've already forgotten what it feels like to be in Bristol Elementary. So there's some value to finding other ways to connect. Sarah.
And just from the other perspective, as someone, an educator in the classroom, it isn't sometimes that relationship is also tricky from that end.
Yeah.
And so, not always that people are wanting to share, but that people feel like they're being potentially watched.
Yeah, that's a good point.
In the role, and so it can be misunderstood.
Yeah, keeping a low profile is probably
Yeah.
a pretty good idea.
Yeah,
That's a really
I'm
good
not
point.
always there to
Yeah,
learn something or judge me.
yeah,
When I put on my parent hat or I walk into, or my community hat, I try not to wear my school board hat at functions,
Mhm.
so I don't know.
Yeah.
And then on the other end of it, I wear a teacher hat at times, and
mhm. Are there folks that experiences that have been on the board that have about being in their schools?
It's a lot of fun most of the time.
Yeah.
It really is to get in the schools.
Yeah.
And like you and, you know, Sarah and others, it's easier for me because I have a kid in the school.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
by the way, the open house was great the other night here.
yes.
Mhm,
It was
mhm.
very well organized
Yeah. Well,
and the
done.
school looks great.
Mhm.
A
It
lot
looks-
of good buzz coming
It
from that.
looks
yeah.
great.
And let me tell you, I got to travel around with my son and 4 other 8th graders, and they were and I felt very appreciative of the staff that were here to welcome them at the end of a long day with all that energy. Great. Well, thanks, everybody. Okay, so we wanted to just talk a little bit about the superintendent evaluation process, and I'm gonna lean on other board members that, Steve, you might be able to help me if I articulate the time frame of the process inaccurately. Because I think I understand how it works, and I definitely understand the core of how it works, but once we start talking about contracts and the year of the contract and last year of the contract, I get completely confused. But essentially, really, the way that we evaluate our superintendent, the crux of that is in our monitoring reports, one of which we heard, our executive limitations monitoring reports, one of which we heard from Patrick today. And as we review those, I capture any feedback you have, and that gets kept on a tracking document. And what we used to do was we would review that, I think, at the meeting that we would sit down with you, or maybe it was, I think at that time. To say, okay, so this is how we evaluate our superintendent. Here's the reports and what they said. But the board didn't really have a chance to talk about it at all.
Right.
Without Patrick there, and to kind of go over that a little more deeply. And I think that's valuable for us to then have the conversation with him at the actual evaluation in November, where we can kind of give some color and life to those monitoring reports. And meaning, so, what Dawn used to do would be to write a letter on behalf of the board that then she would share with us, and we would maybe have a little bit of feedback, but not much, and then we would share that with our superintendent. What I think we hope to do instead, or in addition, is and we built in a meeting for just the board to check in an executive session in October. And what I'd like to do is share that tracking report at that meeting, and we can look at it together and talk through it. And anything else that comes up, so that we can be thinking about that letter together.
Right, that was the problem last
And,
year.
yes.
We needed one more meeting
Yes,
to talk about the letter before it was
yes,
written.
before we then bring it to Patrick. So we all feel like we're really,
It might be good to bring last year's example letter, just to give people a sense of what that means.
yeah,
Yeah,
What the context of that.
Yeah. that's what I remember we wanted to do differently, and I guess this is a chance, Patrick, for you to share if there's anything from your perspective that we could have done differently that would do as well.
So I recognize and appreciate the formality of the monitoring reports as the mechanism for evaluating the superintendent, like that structure is there. That is a component of policy governance. And I really value the dialogue we have that typically follows that sort of more formal piece, and just the conversation about how things are going, what you see as strengths, what you see as areas for growth. That's really valuable to me.
And that's also why we built in, I think it was after one of our, last year, the year before, these quarterly check-ins, so that we weren't just sort of, Patrick wasn't, and we weren't storing it all up for this one opportunity. These things happen all the time that we might want to connect about, so, yeah.
And that's really the purpose for the executive session tonight, right?
Correct.
That's one of those quarters.
One of
yeah.
the executive sessions tonight. Yes. Okay, so that's our plan for that.
13 minutes left if we want to make it 8 o'clock.
Amazing.
Cut off.
So we have our updates here from all of our committees, and like I said in my note, if a committee has something they want time set aside for discussion in a meeting, we can do that, but we need that heads up to make sure we allot that time. Otherwise, these are updates for folks as an FYI, and you can ask any questions right now that you have within that 13-minute, 12-minute time frame. And I did also want to add that maybe, if this sounds good to you, Isabel, that we can also add an update from community council.
Yeah.
And make sure you have time to do that, so it wouldn't be till October, or October 24th meeting where we'd expect that. But we don't have to wait for that to the very end of the meeting. We can flex and shift so that you're always here for that part. So those are the committee reports. Anything from any of the committees that you want to mention, or that board members have questions about? Let's start with finance.
You don't have to.
Oh, I thought you wanted questions if
Oh.
you needed to put it for
If not.
finance.
Yeah, I mean, it's open for comment, question, or if there are none, then that's fine too.
Yeah, we sort of had a busted meeting in the sense that the schedule didn't work out very well with the timing with the whole board meeting.
Yeah.
And so we were unable to really get everybody together, and some technical challenge stuff. So, largely what we did was I talked with Floyd, for an hour. And sort of, again, thinking about laying the groundwork for where we'll go with our next meeting. Maybe just to give a sense of where we're thinking overall. We're really interested in thinking about levers of control within the budget that we actually have some control over, right? So, so many of the costs are relatively fixed. And so when we think about how we're going to prepare a budget and perhaps as importantly, message that budget to the community for their support, I think we've determined that it's really important to be able to be very clear about what we really have control over and what we don't, so that you can have realistic expectations within the community in terms of what kinds of changes we can make. So we've been spending some time going through some of these financial reports and some of the summary that Floyd has provided to try to delineate for ourselves where those fixed versus sort of more flexible costs are. So we can really focus our efforts on the flexible costs, both in terms of crafting the budget and in terms of the messaging and the input that we seek. In terms of that input, we've solicited a couple really lengthy feedbacks for some really involved community members who's kind of given us a really nice overview of some things to consider. And so we're trying to incorporate that feedback into these discussions. And then I guess the last thing that the update talks about is Floyd briefly started to explain a little bit about how some of the changes in per pupil weighting might affect the overall budget, right? So again, these are factors outside of our control, but nevertheless, they constrain what we might be able to do with the budget. So identifying those constraints, identifying flexibility, and then trying to work a budget that people can understand where those two come together is our goal over the next coming months. That's something that captures it, but that's all I have to say.
Great.
And maybe just for clarity for our home viewing audience.
Oh, yeah.
I think there was no meeting. Because there wasn't a quorum, so.
Perfect. So technically there was no meeting.
Exactly.
That, perfect. I like that.
But you instead had a great conversation.
It's wonderful
Nice
conversation,
one.
and it's gonna help inform future actual meetings. Yeah.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Thank you. Okay, and so we heard from the committee, anything on policy and governance?
Outside of the meeting, which people can read the minutes of, I did attend the webinar on the new state policy board governance standards. Did you get a chance to send that around?
No. sorry.
Okay. Well, all I can say is that most of what's in those standards, we are doing in some form or another. I think the thing that's probably the biggest lift for us is just being more conscious of our measuring and monitoring of our progress on those items. So I mean, I think this is an attempt by AOE and to try to move boards more into the policy governance model, even if they're not policy governance, that they're at least looking at some of the goals and frameworks that policy governance is trying to achieve in what they're doing. One of the last comments in the webinar was nobody's coming after you with a stick if you don't do these things. There's no enforcement mechanism. This is really just what we're holding our boards to as a standard. But Krista can pass around what those
Adjust.
standard items are. And other than that, we're basically going through. You can read the meeting minutes. We're going through all the policies and trying to figure out where we're going with things and just sort of getting our toe in the water.
So excited. Any questions or thoughts? Okay. Community Engagement Committee, we are thinking about how to move forward on a plan for this fall based on some of the feedback and engaging different stakeholders on the topic of what folks need to feel a sense of inclusion and belonging in their schools. So we're gonna meet actually next Tuesday instead of the following week because I'm not available. And people had some different things they were charged with looking into. So I'm thinking about next steps, and once we have a more solid, sensible plan, we'll share it with everybody.
One other item just to mention, we did spend a lot of time talking about school choice, interdistrict elementary school choice. I did some review of all the different versions that were put out earlier from the different districts. People might poke into our minutes and poke into some of those review notes, and we're contemplating putting out a community survey to see to gauge just what the how many folks might be interested in this sort of a thing, just to see if there's the danger of a mass exodus, or there's really just, a couple of folks, and also checking in with some of the other districts to see, they're all supposed to be monitoring this on a yearly basis, maybe checking some of those monitoring reports to see how they're doing.
Great. The survey made me wonder if your survey is closing at the end of the month.
End of September, yep.
Okay, and is there a plan for navigating all of that data?
Not yet,
Okay,
there will be a lot of data.
yeah. Okay. Hopefully the AI is working.
That's- We've been in many conversations where they promise it is, right?
Okay, so is there anything else for folks? All right, I have a question, Patrick. I know we need to make 2 separate motions to go into executive session.
Actually,
You can be one motion for 2 topics.
Okay.
Before we do that, do we wanna? do
Oh,
the-
yes, so that's right. We will close up our meeting because we don't have any planned action. So and I don't think there's anyone here for public comment.
Do you wanna do the?
So we'll do the-
self-assessment?
Yep, so we'll do our meeting evaluation and then we will,
I don't think we can close the meeting until we actually vote to go into executive session.
right. So we'll do a meeting evaluation and then we'll let, Vicky and anyone else have them. Anyone have it up and want to do it?
I have it up.
Okay, great.
I know you all are jumping at it. Start. Is everyone familiar with the board evaluation? Have we done it with every new board members know what it is? Okay. All right, what is the level of engagement for all board members, high or low? It said high.
Aye.
Was the agenda followed? Yes, with 1 comment of addition to executive. Anything else? No? Okay. Does the chair effectively establish the agenda and materials for distribution to the board?
Yeah.
Yes.
Is the chair effective in fostering a professional culture regarding fair and open deliberation, full participation of all members, and ensuring the integrity of board process? Yes or no?
Yes.
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 Other feedback for chair? It's a comment box. So. What went well with the meeting?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Any other, what was?
We heard from community members. And that was nice.
Yeah. Any ways to improve future meetings?
I need to bone up on Robert's rules.
Say we should all get a copy of it.
Yes.
I think we should have a resource that's available, so it's not
Yeah.
so much pressure on the chair to make that decision about what to do.
I believe there's a wonderful YouTube skit
About Robert's.
about
rules.
Robert's
Oh my
rules that
gosh.
some 4th graders have taken care of. If I can
Oh,
find it,
How
I
to
will.
table.
That's amazing.
Put it on here, see if I can find it.
Okay. All right, so my other question was, will we be inviting anyone in for either of those two? Not for your check-in, but for the group meetings. In which case we can do that first. Or would you just maybe report? that?
Yeah, I can just close that loop. I'm just trying to think about the context of our conversation today that prompted this. I wanted to respect that.
Get out of that.
Yeah.
There you
I think it's fine to.
Okay, okay. All right, so, we need a motion. We need a motion to go into executive session for Title I BSA 5313A3 for superintendent performance check-in. And also under Title I BSA 313A1D grievance. Does someone make that motion, please?
And invite me.
And invite Patrick.
So moved. For both of those.
And.
All three.
Can I
I'll
have a
second. Sarah.
You're, okay, okay, so, sorry, Mike. And made the motion and Sarah seconded. All right, all those in favor of going into executive session for those two reasons and inviting Patrick, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, everyone else is excused. We'll turn the recording off and then we'll turn it back on to adjourn the meeting when we come out of executive session.
5 minutes.
Bye, Aubrey. Sure. We have coming out of executive session at 9:41. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved.
Steve, and Kathy, you'll be our seconder. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thanks.
Right.
It is.